Pro-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, and Pro-Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests and graduands, as public orator, may I, Professor Turi King, present Helen Sharman, a candidate for an honorary degree. Helen Sharman is the first British astronaut to go to space. She's also the first Western European woman and the first privately funded woman to go to space, as well as the first woman to visit the Mir space station. If this weren't already enough, she is also a highly celebrated science communicator. Helen was born in Sheffield, and her childhood was exceedingly ordinary, with a marked lack of interest in space among her family. When Helen was born, there was no space station. There hadn't been a moon landing. Yuri Gagarin, the first human to travel to space, did so just 2 years before Helen was born. Helen did her undergraduate degree in chemistry at the University of Sheffield and started her working life at the General Electric Company while pursuing a PhD degree at Birkbeck in London. She later moved to work for Mars in the research and development section of the chocolate department. It was one warm summer's evening when Helen was driving home that she heard a radio announcement: "Astronaut wanted, no experience necessary." This was to be the pivotal moment in her hitherto quiet life. After ringing for an application form, which she neglected to fill in until just days before the deadline, she joined over 13,000 other applicants as part of the selection process to be the astronaut for Project Juno. As the UK then had no official astronaut program of its own, Project Juno was to be a commercially funded joint British-Soviet mission designed to boost the warming relationship between the UK and the Soviet Union after the Cold War. The mission would send a British astronaut to the Mir space station. On November 25, 1989, after a rather grueling selection process, Helen was chosen as one of the 4 potential astronauts. As you can imagine, Helen, working for the Mars company, was quickly seized upon by the media for rather pun-heavy headlines. What followed was a further 18 months training in Star City outside Moscow, as well as learning Russian. When the final Juno mission selection was made, it would be Helen who would be the first Briton to go to space on May 18, 1991, nearly exactly 30 years after Yuri Gagarin's first flight. To judge by newspaper reports overnight, she quite rightly became one of Britain's national treasures. Helen, among her things she took to space, carried a cassette tape of music and a signed copy of Yuri Gagarin's autobiography, Road to the Stars, which all of the team signed in space and stamped with the Mir space station stamp. More on that later. The 8-day mission included conducting a series of experiments in space, as well as radio tests answering questions from children in British schools as the Mir station flew overhead. This being a commercially managed mission, albeit with collaboration and support from the Soviet Union, she had to take packets of Sutton seeds, well known to British gardeners, into space and later work with schools to carry out experiments with them. Interflora's sponsorship saw her doing a broadcast from the Mir station while ordering flowers to send to her mum. Helen speaks of the one thing that unites all astronauts, wherever they're from. They love to stare out of the window and never tire of looking at our endlessly, hypnotically beautiful planet. One of the songs she listened to on Mir was Tanita Tickram's The World Outside Your Window. She left the tape for her fellow cosmonaut Tolya, who was staying on, as he loved the song so much, and it was the last song she heard from Mir on her return towards Earth as her re-entry spacecraft traveled further and further from the space station. When Tanita found out her music had been played in space, she wrote to Helen, and rather sweetly, they finally met in person years later when they were both coincidentally on the same bill at an event. When Helen first started out as an astronaut, she will tell you that the seemingly innumerable press conferences, usually standing there in a space jumpsuit which she loathed, were a necessary, if tedious, part of the job. Fame wasn't on her list of reasons for pursuing her career. But what she did find in the 6 months after the flight, when she was giving public lectures and visiting school children, was that she had a gift for science communication. This grew when she started to work with the then Department of Education and Science and honed her communication skills, aided in no small part by the rather unfiltered and direct feedback that you tend to get from 8 to 12-year-olds. Beyond her many professional accomplishments, Helen is known for her calm, unruffled nature and vast enthusiasm for getting children interested in pursuing a career in science. Since then, she's written her autobiography and a children's book and continued to work in science alongside her public engagement career. Helen became group leader of the Surface and Nanoanalysis Group at the National Physical Laboratory and later operations manager for chemistry at Imperial College London. Today, Helen is one of the most foremost science communicators in the country, working part-time as Imperial's UK Outreach Ambassador, as well as a science lecturer and broadcaster, continuing to work with schools to make science interesting and accessible for students. She is also the host of the Zero Pressure podcast about how science and technology can contribute to solving complex, interrelated global challenges. Helen has been a recipient of numerous awards and accolades, both here and in Russia. Here she's been awarded an OBE and the rare honor of a CMG, Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George, for service to science and technology educational outreach, as well as an honorary fellowship with the British Science Association in 2015. The following year, she appeared as herself in an episode of Hollyoaks, the Channel 4 soap opera, and besides having schools and streets named after her, she has a star on the Sheffield Walk of Fame. Helen has been a trailblazer. And it was not until 2015, some nearly 25 years later, that Tim Peake became the second Briton to go to space, this time as part of the UK's involvement in the European Space Agency program. Helen tells a lovely story about the camaraderie between astronauts, which also shows her innate kindness and support for her colleagues. Before Tim's mission to the International Space Station, Helen lent him the Yuri Gagarin signed autobiography, which she too had taken to space. Tim, in turn, took it to space to be signed by all those on his mission and stamped with the ISS stamp. Just before the start of the pandemic, Helen and Tim took part in a ceremony at Leicester's National Space Centre to place the book on permanent display there, and you can find other key artifacts from Helen's mission alongside it, which will continue her work of inspiring younger generations to pursue her space travel, not only space travel, but other scientific careers as well. Helen, the word astronaut comes from the Greek astronaut, astron meaning star, and naut meaning sailor. Helen is a star sailor. As we celebrate your great achievements, may this honorary degree be one of the stars on your travels. Pro-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, Pro-Vice-Chancellor, on the recommendation of the Council and the Senate, I present Helen Sharman, that you may confer upon her the honorary degree of Doctor of Science.
Pro-Chancellor, Vice-Chancellor, distinguished guests and graduands, thank you. I cherish this honour and I look forward to continuing my association with the University of Leicester. Leicester's long been regarded for its science and space activities, and I'm fortunate to have worked with Leicester alumni and researchers from chemistry, astrophysics and astronomy on a variety of projects. I'm also delighted to have been associated with the National Space Centre in Leicester since before it opened, having been introduced to the proposed centre by Professor Ken Pounds, who's here today. Professor Pounds founded the Space Research Group in Leicester in 1960, the year before Yuri Gagarin became the world's first astronaut. So I can safely say that Leicester's space research spans the entire history of humans in space. Ken asked if I had any space artifacts that I could offer for the National Space Centre to display, and I'm very grateful to the knowledgeable and creative people there for showcasing and taking such good care of those personal items I had in space with me. Thank you, Ken, for instigating that. And how wonderful it is to see how much has developed here since then, and to hear of plans and aspirations for the future from the vibrant Leicester community that no doubt will contribute to solving some of the challenges facing the world today. With science, technology, and the planet so close to my heart, it's a great privilege to participate in this ceremony in particular, celebrating the achievements of students from chemistry, computing and mathematical sciences, geography, geology and the environment, and physics and astronomy. Congratulations to you all. While this day marks the end of an era for many of you, it's also the beginning of a new chapter in a rapidly changing world that's full of opportunities. You know, especially with the subjects you have studied and researched, you're now in a great position to make best use not only of what's available to you now, but also many of the new jobs that will be created in the future. I'm sure the University of Leicester has prepared you well. To use space terminology, it's given you a solid platform from which to launch into the future. But space was not on my agenda at all when I was a university student. After my BSc, I was enjoying my career as a chemist in industry. But when a brand new space mission was announced and was seeking British applicants, I decided to go for it. It was an opportunity that had just not been possible before. Now, it's often the stuff on the side that we find tough to deal with. Astronaut training for someone who already understands the basics of science is relatively easy. More difficult was being given 4 days' notice before training started to sell my car, write a will, arrange power of attorney. You know, there's no internet banking then. There was no internet as we know it now. I had to buy warm clothes for the Moscow winter, resign from my job at Mars Confectionery, and give media interviews that I saw later with some of the headlines that Professor King alluded to just now. Things like, "Girl from Mars goes to the stars." And it got worse. "Helen leaves the Milky Way for another galaxy." I mean, you can only imagine the things that headline writers like. But keeping going when my mission became uncertain while I was behind the Iron Curtain in a culture I didn't understand at first was a real learning experience. I mean, the Soviet Union, of course, doesn't exist anymore, but you, graduates, will have your own experiences in life in which you will grow in resilience that are just as career-defining as the ones that actually make it to your CV. But I'm a firm believer that we get out of life what we put in. And after 18 months of training, I launched into space and got to feel weightless. And feeling weightless is the most natural, relaxing feeling you can imagine. You know, I forgot what it felt like, what it feels like to stand up and feel the pressure of the floor beneath my feet, or to sit down, and if you think about it, feel the pressure of the seat beneath you. I could somersault my way through breakfast. I carried out some amazing experiments, and I spent my spare time watching the Earth spin and the stars shine. I've been able to use my astronaut experience to communicate science, technology, engineering, and maths, and that has given me more pleasure than I ever could have imagined. My time at university allowed me to start on that journey, but when I graduated, I did not know the doors that it would open. You've achieved much in your time as a student here, with such a strong foundation in a changing world of fresh opportunities. I mean, think how much more you will do. There are areas for us all to explore if we put our skills and resilience to good use, remain open to what is new, and are confident to go for it. You, graduates, you are the stars of the future. Shine brightly.